Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta, and today we'll be dipping into the library's archives for a conversation with musician, record producer, and neuroscientist Daniel J. Levitin from back in August 2008. His book, The World in 6 Songs, How the Musical Brain Created Human Nature, details the role of music in human development over thousands of years. He sat down with former library volunteer Dave Watson to talk about his book. They chat about art and its place in humanity's story, lyrics and how they relate to poetry, and there's even a quaint little bit in here about how iPods and MP3s might change our relationship with music. Here's their conversation. Enjoy.
I'm your host, Dave Watson, and with me in the studio today, it is a privilege to have Daniel J. Levitin, author of the New York Times bestseller, This Is Your Brain on Music, whose new book, The World in 6 Songs, is everywhere virtually right now. Daniel J. Levitin runs the Laboratory for Music Perception, Cognition, and Expertise at McGill University. Before becoming a research scientist, he was a record producer and professional musician. As a producer, he has a number of gold records to his credit and has worked on albums by artists such as Stevie Wonder, Midnight Oil, and K.D. Lang. It's quite a range there. He has played professionally with Mel Torme, Blue Oyster Cult, and David Byrne. He has published extensively in scientific journals such as Science and Neuron and in audio trade journals such as Grammy, Billboard, and Audio Magazine. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
All right. This is a wonderful book, and it really starts off with, it seems that with all your experience, you're still seeking to understand music in a lot of facets.
I'd say that's right.
Were there any surprises along the way? Because you're really almost attacking this as not attacking, so that's the wrong word, as an anthropologist, really, as someone seeking to understand. What was the biggest surprise for you in writing this book or researching it?
I think the role that music played in the evolution of our species has been underappreciated and not well documented. That's one of the reasons for the book, really. As far as we know, music has been with our species as long as there have been Homo sapiens. It's one of the things that characterizes the human brain uniquely from other species is that no other animal composes music, does variations on a theme, uses music to communicate in the variety and to the extent that humans do. Of course, we have spoken language, we have art, we have science. There are a number of things that characterize humans. Music is one of them.
And that's great. And you say that you mentioned art in there, and art is one of the aspects of us that separates us from lower developed species.
There are no other species that spontaneously make art. I mean, elephants have been taught to paint. There are these YouTube videos of elephants painting extraordinary things, but they've been taught stroke by stroke how to do it. They didn't do it on their own. They just make the same painting over and over again in exchange for peanuts. They're literally working for peanuts. Now, that they can do that is extraordinary, but it's not the same as what humans do.
Right, and sometimes with somebody's art, you can see them evolve, you know, be it a musician. And one musician you have a great quote from in the book by Sting. He seems one of those musicians that's evolved, you know, from the Police to had jazz musicians, Branford Marsalis and Joachim on drums with Dream of the Blue Turtles, Nothing Like the Sun, and then he went on his own. Yeah. But he still seems evolving and creating over decades.
And I think that's what distinguishes the true artist from the craft person. The true artist is seeking to expand their knowledge, to push at the boundaries, and you take people like Sting or Miles Davis, Picasso, constantly trying to explore and understand where they're going.
And when last summer at Zoo Tunes here in Seattle, I saw Herbie Hancock. Yeah. And he's, I believe, in his 60s, and I think he seems to be one of those that is continually searching and evolving as a musician as well.
I think that's right. And he has that wonderful album out now of his interpretation of Joni Mitchell songs.
Wow, I did not know that.
Came out about a year ago. It won a Grammy, in fact.
Okay. All right. That's great. And they seem to be as diverse from Sting to Miles Davis, and even the other day I saw West Side Story on the TV on a Sunday afternoon, and I realized how Leonard Bernstein's score for that, it seems ahead of its time, but it also seems timeless because West Side Story is still performed today.
Sure.
People know the songs
The
by
Sharks
heart.
and the Jets.
Yes, absolutely. But people can even hum the tune to Maria.
Yeah.
And then if you want to go further back, there's the one, I believe it's the only song that starts with the perfect octave, is Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz.
There's probably others, but that's the one where many
Yeah.
musicians learn what the octave is, and they learn the tritone from Maria. Maria.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and in that sense, some music is timeless, and yet some people try to create new sounds. Do you think there's a formula for success? I want to say clear that word formula, but some songs seem to be, transcend time, transcend cultures, and you do talk about the universal qualities of music in particular. Do you think there are some qualities that are just going to be transferred to a global stage?
Well, I think that whenever an artist is engaging in truthful expression, when they're being true with themselves and with their audience, that comes through, and that's the important quality. And whether it becomes a commercially successful song or an artistically successful song, those are two different questions. Some things become artistically successful. In my generation, there was this, what was actually written as a novelty song at the last minute because they had to fill an album called Na Na Hey Hey Kiss 'Em Goodbye. Na 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 na. I mean, and it's a big stadium classic now.
Yeah,
and
it's in sports games, I believe they say.
yeah, I mean, they just happened to hit something that people liked. It was kind of accidental. It's catchy, but nobody's claiming that it's the same as My Funny Valentine or as Beethoven's Sixth. Deeper, perhaps, expressions, the latter two. Commerciality and fads is different than art. Sometimes they intersect, sometimes they don't. In terms of a formula, I think the formula for making good art is to look for some honest expression, to try and provide to the listener or the viewer in visual art a perspective they might not otherwise have, to make choices about what it is you want to represent. When I make a drawing, I'm not representing the object, if it's a drawing of a real object, a buffalo on a cave wall or a still life on canvas, I'm not representing the object so accurately and so precisely that you would mistake it for the object. If I were to do that, I'd just have another copy of the object. I'd just have another apple.
Right.
Here's an apple. If I want to represent it exactly, it's another apple. That's not art. Art is if I make choices about which aspects of the apple to feature in a particular way.
And they're the features that stand out to you.
Right.
And
they may not stand out to you, which is what causes you to look at the object differently.
Right. Which almost leads to criticism of music. And we've kind of, people will be heavily critical if something is successful or something like that, something along those lines, or that it leads to commentary.
Yeah.
And you talk about honest expression, and yet music seems to be an industry now where people say, oh, they're controlled by big corporations, they're looking to kind of replicate, or they are almost looking for a formula to replicate success, to sell CDs.
Yeah.
And would you say that your book comes into contact with that at all? As far as the commercialization of music?
Well, I do talk about that in the chapter on joy, because advertisers have co-opted joy songs or these giddy feeling happy songs to sell their products. And I mean, in our generation, the most blatant use of that was that they managed to make one of the most popular products in our lifetimes sell, in enormous numbers, and it's nothing more than a spring. It's slinky. For fun,
Right.
It's the best of the toys. I mean, there's something about that catchy song made every kid want to have the slinky.
Right.
And, you've got it with Coke and Pepsi, and you've got it with McDonald's, and if you buy our product, you'll have fun, and you'll be happy all the time, and there is this commercialization, this other ulterior alternative use of music that stands apart from its artistic expression. And I'm not saying these can't be artistic creations. Commercial songs can be artistic, but what they're doing is they're exploiting a kind of, and exploitation isn't necessarily bad. leveraging a property
Yeah.
of music that the songs get stuck in your head and they cause an emotional reaction. And they're using it to sell a product that you might not otherwise buy.
Right. And then from what you just said, would you say that's a recent development?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard. Maybe. I mean, were people going around Sumeria 3,500 years ago singing, buy my sandals, you'll be happier.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. So we could say it's a recent trend. You also talk about
Sam sandals, the ones that keep the sand out of your feet.
Oh, I like that. That's good. I think you just came up with one right here. When you talk about something, you say Samaria 3,500 years ago, music does seem everywhere.
Yeah.
And yet it's also reached, I think, a very personal level. You mentioned iPods and MP3 downloadables now. Music can be a very personal thing as well. People want it. They like their music, how they want it. When people mix a CD, they put it in a particular order.
Yeah.
And do you find it to be or I guess my question would be, do you find it's going to be increasingly personal as years go on, or do you think people are going to, it's still a very social thing as well?
Well, I don't really know where things are going to go, but what we can talk about is the differences between where they are now and where they've been, and that might help to make a projection.
That's probably a better question, better way to phrase it.
But what we have now in the age of the iPod, with everybody with their personal music player and the earpod, even the Olympic athletes had these earbuds dangling from their ears.
Yeah, I noticed that last week, yeah.
For tens of thousands of years, music was a shared, communal, participatory activity. Where there was music among our ancestors, I'm talking mostly primitive hunter-gatherer ancestors, where there was music, there was activity. Everybody joined in, young and old, whether you were good or not good at it. Everybody danced. Music was woven into the fabric of everyday life as part of rituals, as part of daily chores. Now we have a special class of people who make music for the rest of us, the experts. And we don't tend to join in so much. And with the personal music player, a phenomenon that can really trace its origin not even to the birth of digital music, but farther back to the transistor. The transistor is what freed you from having to listen to music near a 110-volt outlet and to take music on the go. Because unlike vacuum tubes, the transistor could operate on 1.5 volts, 3 volts.
Okay, so very little energy.
To take music to the beach, you could put it in your pocket. You couldn't control the music. The radio stations did that. But, once you had cassettes and CDs and now MP3s, it's the music you want. And we do tend to listen in isolation. So the first thing to go in this historical progression or degression, however you want to look at it, the first thing to go is the participatory aspect of music. And then the communal part. We have music that we listen to all by ourselves. Now, that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It may be that people will have more music in their lives and be able to more effectively incorporate music into the soundtrack of their lives, to have the music that they like, not be subjected to music they don't like. That sounds like a good thing. But we may find that it cuts us off from the historical uses of music, which were for community building.
Okay. Do you still see music used for community building today?
Oh, absolutely. When the Democrats sing at the convention, they're singing their song. This is us. This is who we are. This is what defines us. After 9/11, the whole country was singing God Bless America. It's interesting that they didn't start singing the national anthem.
Right,
But
yeah.
they did sing God Bless America, which became a kind of de facto national anthem. People got all kinds of weepy-eyed feelings of compassion and anger and frustration and pride all mixed into this one song. And, anti-war songs are bonding communities together.
Absolutely. And you talked about God Bless America after 9/11, and one of your 6 categories is comfort.
Yeah.
And you also talk about, on page 44 of your book, you talk about, you have a great example.
Page 44, I remember it well.
Yeah, you remember it well. I'm sorry. I remember it well because I just read the book. But you have 2 groups of young kids that go back a bit. And then the one that unite, they're different in social order. But the one that brings them together is an old song, Smoking in the Boys' Room.
Yeah.
You say there's 50 Cent, how he says his name, has one group singing and tapping their foot and singing along. Then Christina Aguilera comes on, but then what really gets the two groups joined together is "Smoking in the Boys' Room," which I believe was re-recorded by Motley Crue,
Right.
which we all thought was original in the '80s, but we were mistaken. And comfort is a huge device of music. People kind of find comfort and solace in it. Do you find that one of your 6 categories, and I'll name them here, you say there are songs of friendship, joy, comfort, knowledge, religion, and love. A lot of them are different. And what were some of the differences that come out? Like, I'll take the first 2, friendship and joy. What were some of the differences that come out between those 2 categories of songs?
Well, I should point out, it's a psychological theory. It's not a musicological one. So it's not that there's difference in the music itself necessarily. It's not that there's different chords or different rhythms, but there might be what there are differences in the way people use it and the way they respond to it. Mm-hmm. So social bonding or friendship songs are meant to bind people together. Joy songs are simply an expression of being in a good mood and being happy, and maybe that helps you attract a mate. Nobody wants to be with somebody who's depressed and pessimistic.
Very true. That's a universal human quality, you'd almost say. Yeah. Okay. And with comfort, I want to go back to that real quick. Comfort seems to be just music almost seems to have that universal quality. People will listen to music for comfort all over the world. I had a flashback actually to middle school, and one of my friends, actually 2 of my friends, very different, listened to classical music for comfort. Did you encounter that in your research where you found people just very different, and yet they listen to something for the same reasons?
Yeah, or the opposite. I surveyed thousands of people about what music they listen to and how they use it. And one of the surprising things is there's an AC/DC song called Back in Black, considered to be kind of proto-heavy metal. I mean, many people would just say that's heavy metal. But the interesting thing is that some people said that they listened to that song to help get them up in the morning. They found it rousing and exciting, or they would use it to get through an exercise workout. It was motivating because of its heaviness. And then I had other people say about that same song that they found it soothing. After listening to Swedish death metal in a packing plant all day long, they'd come home, open up a beer, and put on the relatively calm Back in Black by AC/DC.
It makes you wonder about the Swedish metal. Yeah.
But there is a whole continuum of experience, and the same song can serve different purposes for different people. What I find to be a love song, you may find to be a completely objectionable piece of tripe. You may find that it's more of a friendship song, if you like it, than a love song. I mean, an example I use in the book is Johnny Cash's "I Walk the Line," which I think is working at 2 levels, as a love song and a knowledge song. Well, it's probably obvious that it's love song qualities. Because you're mine, I walk the line. He's singing to her. And the line he's walking is the line of fidelity. He's not going to go and have a relationship with a woman that's other than her, or the you of the song. But I think when I say it works at 2 levels, I think that what's really going on is that Johnny's singing the song to himself, and he wrote it as a reminder of all that he has at stake. I find it very, very easy to be true, he sings. I think that he's hoping that it's easy, but in fact it's not. I find myself alone when each day's through. I'm willing to bet he doesn't find himself alone when each day's through. Because you're mine, I walk the line. This is a musical string around his finger. It's a knowledge song, self-knowledge. He's reminding himself of how important this is.
And it's almost a journey then. He's trying to convince himself.
Exactly.
While singing that song, or probably while writing it. You can recite all these words by memory. It's very impressive. And you do talk about music and lyrics at one point And I believe it's also Sting who says lyrics and music are kind of a mannequin and clothes. You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
You either have this naked statue or you have a pile of cloth.
Yeah. It's a nice quote.
Yeah. What did you discover about music and lyrics, or did it change your thinking of lyrics at all and words with music?
I think that I went into this whole enterprise thinking that lyrics were a separate class of object from poetry. And I think it came from, like a schoolmarm mentality of, there's the great poem of Longfellow and Wordsworth and the great poems of, Yeats and, and then there's this sort of cheap, superficial form of Bebop-A-Lula, She's My Baby. And they are different things. But what I discovered, and I'm now convinced of, is that they're all kinds of poetry. They're all forms of poetry. Music lyrics are poetry. It's not that they're a kind of poetry. They are poetry. It's just that, there's good poetry and there's bad poetry, just as there's good lyrics and bad lyrics. And there's sophisticated or unsophisticated, apart from the good-bad distinction. I love Ogden Nash as a poet. People acknowledge that he's a poet. His poems don't exist with the multiple layers of nuance in the way that a Yeats poem does. But, say Byzantium, for example, or a T.S. Eliot poem. But that's fine. It's still poetry. And Bebop-A-Lula may not be Amelia by Joni Mitchell, but it functions as, you got to admit, the lyrics are memorable. It's doing its job.
And they seem to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
Over decades, and they transcend cultures. And when you say lyrics are poetry, that might, at first, might strike one as a hardcore stance against something. But a lot of people do just say lyrics out loud. They just recite them.
Yeah.
Almost in a vacuum, I want to say. Or
there are slightly different considerations when one composes poetry, spoken poetry versus sung lyrics, because poetry doesn't have the additional element of music, of pitch, explicitly to help it along. Now, in fact, we do, when we read poems, use changes in pitch just like when we speak. There's a natural melody to our voices. We go up at the end of a sentence when it's a question, and we come down when it's a statement. And, poetry, because of its metrical structure and the forms that it usually has, constrains some of the meaning. Music, though, generally has explicit pitches, and so the way in which the lyrics, the words function is slightly different. There are different considerations. In some sense, you can get away with a little more in music because the melody and its harmony can help to provide some of the emotional cues as to what you're supposed to take from it. In poetry, you don't have that. Poetry, although one thing they share is they're both meant to be heard. Almost any poet will tell you they intend for their poems to be read out loud. It's meant to be heard, not silent. Just as any composer will tell you, you're not supposed to look at the score. You're supposed to hear it performed. Now, we have poetry relatively less often performed for us. People aren't buying records with poems read. But, that's a commercial issue. It's that's how poetry is intended.
And I believe at one point you say that music provides a framework or extensive framework, or it might be Sting, that says music provides a framework for the poetry.
I've not often been confused with Sting before. Thank you.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, it does. The accent structure of the notes themselves facilitate or conspire to constrain certain choices in the words that'll fit.
Okay, and sometimes with that idea in mind, Led Zeppelin came to mind actually.
Yeah.
when I was in China many years ago as a college student, I played in an orchestra because I played trumpet for 12 years pretty strongly. And sat next to a Chinese student, and my stand partner at the time, he said, "Oh, do you like Led Zeppelin?" And here was China in 1993, and yet he could recite all the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven, in both English, and then he liked them so much that he transcribed them to Chinese.
They were great lyricists. I think Robert Plant wrote most of the lyrics. He's a great lyricist. A lot of literary sensibility. It's not all autobiographical. It's not Moon and June. It's stories. It's stories about war. He's got this wonderful lyric, The Battle of Nevermore, that comes straight out of Tolkien. He's writing about the Lord of the Rings.
I did not know that. Okay.
He talks about the going to the mountains of Mordor in the song.
Right, and there's also Kashmir. And so they're kind of sprawling in his reach and in his depth. And music does seem to be one of those mediums where there are layers to it. You can have words. But then the other day I was listening to the jazz pianist Chick Corea. And with just 3 instruments, piano, drums, and bass, with John Patitucci on bass and Dave Weckl on drums, they come together, and yet they kind of split apart. Sometimes they're doing their own things.
Yeah.
Did you come into contact with that at all? With kind of instruments playing off one another and then kind of building relationships with one another?
Yeah. This, in many cases, playing music regardless of the song, in fact, has the function of binding together the musicians. When you played music together with somebody, especially in a kind of free-form small combo like that, it requires a lot of accommodation. Listening to them, thinking about what they're doing, it really requires you to come out of yourself. And it requires some generosity and some, for it to work. And people who've played music together, I think, develop a bond that is tighter and closer than many other activities. I have a friend who married a musician. He's a musician, and he says there are times when they'd rather make music together than make love together. It's a different kind of intimacy.
Wow, and very intimacy one, very intimate one. And one time you come into contact with the great anthropologist Clifford Geertz, and he talks about. You approach him, it seems, saying, "What's the universal qualities of music?" And he says, "No, transcending cultures." And he says, "No, you want to talk about how they differ."
Yeah, there were a number. You asked me earlier what I learned in the book, and I learned it was a humbling experience because I learned that I held a lot of biases and assumptions I didn't know that I held.
Yeah, so did I in reading this book, and I think the average reader will as well.
I mean, one of the biases was that lyrics aren't really poetry. Well, I learned that they are. There's good lyrics, there's bad lyrics, good poetry, bad poetry. Another assumption of many that I unwittingly held was that the best way to understand music and its role in human society was to look at those aspects of music use that were common across all different cultures and across time. And it was my friend who's chairman of anthropology at Stanford, Jim Ferguson, who steered me towards Clifford Geertz, who's written extensively on this topic. And Geertz says, you don't learn about humanity by looking at the elements in common, because humanity isn't characterized by that. It's characterized by the great diversity of practices it employs. Mm-hmm. And so to truly understand music, you don't want to look at things like, every culture has the octave, or every culture subdivides that octave into 12 to 15 parts. You want to look at the many different manifestations of musical behavior. That's really the richness of the human species.
All right. That's a wonderful note to end on. I regret to say we are out of time. And the book is The World in 6 Songs. Daniel Levitin, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and talk with us.
Thanks for having me.
Daniel J. Levitin's book, The World in 6 Songs, How the Musical Brain Created Human Nature, is in the catalog of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. It's available as an audiobook with the class ID DB67752, It's also available in Braille with the class ID BR018233. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you're qualified for our services, visit WTBBL.org or call us Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.